arrow, any down or right will work.
Okay, cool. Alrighty. Sorry. You all have some food. Thank you so much for attending. Probably actually our first event of 2023. Wi-Fi's a little bit flaky today, but we do have, you are all live on YouTube Live for our friends on both GDG Chicago and GDG Cloud Chicago. Actually, I don't have a camera. Yeah, so we're not visible. That's he's not working again, so apologies. Something we'll look at for next meetup. So if you don't already do so, follow us on Twitter at GDG, Chicago GDG. Both of our meetups are there. I say both because I run the cloud meetup, and Dan over here is kind of heading up our general GDG meetup, the OG community, if you will. Yeah. Again, just kind of talking about it. One is very cloud focused, so things like Kubernetes, BigQuery, data, Android is going to be more so on here, web, analytics. This one kind of bleeds both topics, so we decided let's kind of blend the pictures because both Google Cloud and not Google Cloud, right? So figured we'd do a little bit of a joint session today. If you like this event, if you like the space, we're going to be doing this next event next week on Wednesday. It's best practice deploying to Kubernetes. So be sure to sign up for that. We're going to be joined with some folks from Armory, just talking around some of the things we've seen. At scale, they help maintain and manage some teams out there. So it's pretty interesting. So it'll be right here, same spot, next Wednesday. I just wanted to give a round of applause, just a thank you to the Aspen group for hosting us today. It's not easy finding a venue, as I see some of our other organizers here from GDSC. It's not easy to find a venue, so thank you, Aspen Group, for hosting us. And actually, Bob, do you want to say anything? Or? Cool. So just giving a shout out that we have a tech blog. I work there, someone or other. That's how we're going to kind of get funding for this too. So check us out. We do a little bit of everything. So Aspen Dentals, Well-Nows. If you've seen Physicians Immediate Care, that's kind of under our umbrella too. Pet Vet, AZ Pet Vet. I'm probably missing Clear Choice as well. So pretty cool company to work for. Pretty nice office too. So if you're interested, check out our career page or just check out our blog. We do some cool stuff there too. With that being said, let's actually kick off the topic today. Today we're joined with Leslie Chun. He actually came on November 2019? Sometime in 2019. That's like a forever time machine now. To join us and gave a one-on-one talk around Google Cloud. And today it's kind of a follow-up talk. So Leslie, by all means,
all right, great. Thanks, Joel. Appreciate it. Howdy, everyone. Happy to be here. I just got off the plane. My flight was delayed. I was kind of worried it was going to be over-delayed, but fortunately it wasn't that delayed. So happy to be here. And we're going to explore Google APIs again, but this time we're going to dive deeper. So in 2019, if you guys saw the video that Joel linked to on the website, I gave it kind of like a high-level intro to our APIs as well as where to run your code. So typically, I introduce the serverless stuff because it's sort of like the least friction to actually getting your code running online. Obviously, if you want more control, then you have to get a VM or Kubernetes and things like that. But typically, serverless is the easiest way to get things done. I discussed a lot of APIs in that talk, but I didn't show much code at all. So today's going to be a little different. So hopefully you have your coding hats on because you're going to see a lot of code. I haven't had a chance to put the small snippets up on GitHub yet, but you'll get the slide deck, so you'll have access to it, and eventually I will stick them into GitHub. The larger examples, they're on GitHub, so you don't have to worry about that. Okay? So we're going to focus mostly on the REST APIs today, and we're going to cover multiple product groups. We're going to talk about cloud versus non-cloud, because if any of you have that experience, you will know that it is different using non-cloud Google APIs and vice versa. So I want to sort of bring the two worlds together because Google will not tell you how to do this. We don't have any documentation or anything that talks about this because what happens is when you're employed at Google, you work for one team, one product or product group, and that's all you work for. You don't work across multiple products. So in my 20% time when I was there, I spent a lot of time trying to bridge this gap. And so to me, it's kind of a passion. But the other reason is when you don't work at Google, when you look at someone who does work at Google, you expect them to know everything about Google. And it just doesn't happen that way, right? You can kind of ask me Fire-based questions. I'll try to answer, but there's no guarantees. Same thing goes for Android or whatnot, right? So you only are an expert in the area that you're assigned to. But I feel more empathy for our customers, and I want users to have a better experience. So my 20% time was actually to try and bridge this gap. And so this talk is based on my experience trying to tie those two worlds together. So let's switch slide decks. Okay, and kick this one off. And then, I know I have a laser pointer here, but I like the virtual one better sometimes. This one isn't always very bright. Oh, it works better when you turn it on. Okay, don't forget to turn it on. Okay, so yeah, so we're gonna explore cloud versus non-cloud Google APIs. I'm Wesley Chun. Sorry I didn't introduce myself. I have my own consulting business. I'm also a part-time faculty member at a local community college in Silicon Valley. And, oh, by the way, I'm happy to take questions afterwards. If we run out of time, you didn't get a chance to ask me, I'm on a plane back to California. If you have something later on, I have a link to an open Google Doc that you can ask a question. You can also see other questions that people have asked in previous talks that I've given, as well as some of my answers. I still know a lot of people at Google, so I can usually ping somebody internally and hopefully get some answers, but usually there's some lag time. So if you can, if you can think of the question, ask me tonight. All right, so my background is I'm a teacher, so I've taught corporate training classes at lots of different companies and at different schools. I'm also a writer, so if you know Python, I've written a bunch of Python books. I'm actually now working on the 3rd edition of this one. This is the 3rd edition of the second part. Okay, Volume 2, Volume 1. Volume 1 is how to do Python. Volume 2 is now that you know Python, what can you do with it? So like databases, XML, JSON, Microsoft Office, GUIs, whatnot. So the language one is the one that needs updating. The applications one probably needs some updating too, but working at Google is kind of tricky in terms of finding time to work on books. So I have more time to devote to the books now. So that's that. But most importantly, while I'm a teacher and a writer, the most important thing about me is I'm a software engineer. I've worked in industry for the past several decades. I was one of the original developers that built Yahoo Mail. There were about 10 of us. That was years ago, many years ago. Since then, I've worked at other companies as well too. So this is sort of like a menu of some of my experience. So what is my job? My job is to help developers be successful using cloud and other Google developer tools and APIs. I focus on Python, as you can tell, also Google Cloud and Google Workspace, and most importantly, cross-product, and even more important, use cases that involve multiple Google products. In my consulting business, I typically do like intense Python training. The goal is to not teach the language, because a lot of people already know the language. There's a lot of videos online. You don't really need me. My job is to actually produce competent Python programmers. Learning the language is just a side effect. So really talking a lot about stuff that happens under the covers. And if you know more about how the Python virtual machine works, then you'll be a better developer. Okay, so that's really the main idea. But outside of the language stuff, I also give tech talks, as you can tell. I make videos, I make code labs, code samples, and things like that. So my background is I've been a software developer for many years, teacher as well, writer, and I'm a member of the Python community. But that's enough about me, because this talk is not really about me, it's about you. So why are you here? Really is to build on any previous Google API talks that you've been to or experience you may have had, and to try and level you up. Specifically, I want to talk about cloud versus non-cloud APIs. The main difference, as we will discover tonight, is it's the client library that makes the biggest difference. There's two types. There's lower level, and then there's also product level, and I'll discuss that. Show you a ton of code samples. Again, you'll get the slide deck, so you don't have to take pictures unless you have to have it now. Okay, it's fine. The main idea is if I give you this awareness, it will reduce friction and challenges when you go ahead and start doing this kind of stuff in real life. All right? So in between giving you a high-level intro, so kind of reviewing the one-on-one stuff really quickly and wrapping up the talk, I will talk about exactly what are the steps you need to take to get to using Google APIs. I will talk about first the non-cloud APIs, and there's a reason for this. And specifically, I focus on Workspace because the Workspace APIs is the largest collection of non-cloud APIs. So that's why I focus on that. Plus, I used to work on the team. I worked on the team for like 6 years, so I'm very familiar with all of them. And then, of course, we'll talk about cloud APIs, and then other Google APIs, and then maybe provide some inspiration in what happens when you mix and match. So that's the agenda for tonight. Okay, so intro, why are you here? So of course Google has all these apps, Gmail and Chrome, Search, YouTube, and Android, and that's great. But realize that these are apps that Google has produced that you are using. So you are a user in this case. All right. The problem with this is that you cannot wait for Google to write every app for you to use in your life. All right. As technical professionals, there's going to be some itch that Google is not going to scratch for you, or there's a need that your business has that Google's not going to write the solution for you, so you have to do it, or somebody has to do it, just not Google, all right? So besides the tech that everybody knows and sees, there's a lot more than that, okay? Well, we just can't do it all, or Google can't do it all. All right, it's up to you. So Google has made a lot of its technologies available to you via developer APIs, tools, platforms. All right, so all these things are to help you take advantage of the technologies that Google has built so you can leverage those and integrate those into your app and not necessarily wait for Google to write that app for you. Okay, so these APIs are available to you, and you're going to use them to work on your next, web or mobile app, or more than likely both, because that's kind of like the way it is. You have to be able to do both, right? All right, so users have said, you know what, using Google APIs is not the smoothest cup of tea that you can drink, and there's a lot of issues where maybe the documentation isn't clear, there's not enough code samples. I think that's the biggest thing, there's not enough code samples. And then you get into the security code, and it drives you crazy, and then you give up. All right, we don't want that to happen, or I don't want that to happen, because there's a lot of stuff you can take advantage of. You just need to get past these hurdles. All right. Yes, it's great that most APIs have a quick start. Okay, it's great that the quick start's goal is to get you started in 5 minutes. You should be able to get a working sample app using a specific API within 5 minutes. But before you arrive at a product page, there's a lot of setup that you need to do to make that happen. Okay, so that's what we go into the next section of the talk is how to use Google APIs. How do you get started, basically? All right, so before we get there, a couple of words on security. This is a potential interview question, by the way. There's two big words that start with auth. All right, and they mean different things, so I just want to make it clear. Like if you already know what this is, that's great. But if you're new to APIs, you really need to know the difference between these two, all right? So the first one is authentication. So this is you are who you say you are, and typically it's like login and password of some sort. In a more secure environment, you may need to provide fingerprints or your retina, again, just to prove you are who you say you are. So that's great. Once you get past that part, now do you have access? So that's where authorization comes in. Okay, so yes, you may be authenticated in, but do you have authorization to access this type of data? Okay, and so most of the time when you see auth, it does refer maybe a tiny bit auth in, but mostly like 80% it's auth Z. Okay, and so with Google APIs, you basically, to get authorization, you need some sort of permission scope or some IAM permissions, or else you're just using a plain old API key. Okay, so some people call this consent versus credentials. You're all pretty smart. I'll let you guess which one is which. Should be fairly straightforward. Okay, all right. So that's that. So How do you use Google APIs? General steps are you go to the Cloud Console, you log into your Google or your Gmail account. If you do have a workspace domain, it may require admin approval to be able to use the Cloud Console, especially if you're a student. A lot of school administrators don't want students creating all kinds of cloud projects. So you may have to end up using your Gmail account. So for every application that you work on, generally speaking, you should have one project. So a project is just a logical container for a set of resources that you're going to be using, whether it's for exactly one app or whether you have a set of related apps that you're going to have all under control from one project. Once you have that going, once you have a project, you go to the API, the dev console, and you enable the APIs you want to use. If you use the cloud APIs, you need to enable billing. That usually means a credit card, or you may have a free trial, or if you're a student, you may have student credits and things like that. All right, once that's done, you can download the client library or libraries for whichever APIs you're using. Then you go back into the Cloud Console and create and download whatever credentials you need for which APIs. We're going to cover this, all right, because different APIs require different types of credentials. You need to know about them, the differences between them, and which ones you need to use. Then you write your code, and then you run your code, and that may require some kind of user authorization before your code can fully execute. All right, so writing the code. All right, so a little bit more about costs at the end. That's just sort of like a preview of one of those slides at the end. But writing the code, what do you have to do in your code? There are three things. You import the API client library that you've downloaded. You create an API client object, and then once you have that client, then you can make API calls. Okay, so it's just 3 steps, things you need to add to your code. All right, so here's the Cloud Console. There's a lot of stuff in the console. I don't have time to cover all of it, but the major sections are the section that includes all the cloud tools that you're going to use. And by the way, this list goes down, runs across the floor and all the way to the back because it's a very, very long list. This should be hashed out. I don't know how to make that happen. So that's where you choose the product you're going to use if you're using a cloud product. All right, but you don't have to. It's optional. Billing, of course, is a necessity. If you're going to have other users, other developers, if you are in a work team or a student group and you want to have other people participate in your project, that's controlled by the Identity Access Management, IAM, and the admin page. And then most importantly is the dev console. That's where you turn on the APIs you want to use. Okay? So we're going to take a look at that in a moment. So for billing, it's your favorite subject, right? Don't let things get out of control, all right? Because you can have runaway bills. It's not good because you see it on Reddit, right? Oh my God, I have a $50,000 bill. Please, Google, I beg of you. I don't want to declare bankruptcy at age 26. But what you can do is you can set up alerts. And then when alerts happen, when you set up a budget, when alerts happen, you can say what percentage is, and then whatever, if you pass that percentage of your budget, then you can get an alert. It won't stop billing, but it'll send you an alert. So keep an eye out for the alerts, all right? That's the important part. Okay, so that's that. And then, like I said, if you're in a student group or a work team and you want to add other users, again, that's all done by the IAM and Identity Access Management pages. You have to learn about the roles, okay? It's great to have owner and editor. They're very useful because you can do lots of stuff with those. The problem is there's a lot of permissions in those roles. And so when you so it's great when you're prototyping, but when you go to production, you got to tighten it down. All right, and you got to basically remove every permission except for the ones that are absolutely required so that your application works. That way, no one's going to go crazy on the billing stuff. You won't get surprises. All right, so when I say least secure, it doesn't mean it's not secure. It just means that there's too many permissions available because it's really meant as a general purpose. Okay, let's prototype. Let's not have a lot of friction to get something working. And again, when you go to production, you got to lock it down, create your own service accounts, and only give the specific permissions that you want to give. Okay? So again, it doesn't mean it's not secure. All right. So there's different screens in the roles page, and then understanding these 3 very powerful roles. Typically, you would use the roles for a particular product that you're using, not these these are like overall type roles that are general across all cloud products. You would typically look for roles that are tied specifically to the products that you're using. Okay. All right, so that said, we get to the Dev Console finally. Shortcut, if you don't want to go to the Cloud Console and then click your way down into the Dev Console, you can just type this link. It'll take you directly there. Okay. Anytime you see a blue box with a little play button, that means I made a video on it, so you can take a look at that if you want to dive into it a little bit more details. So this is the Dev Console. The Dev Console has a bunch of tabs. There's 3. I'm only going to show the dashboard, but I'll describe the other 2. So on the dashboard is where you can see all your app statistics, like how much traffic is your app getting, how many errors is it generating, and what's the average response time to your users. And then below that is a list of all the APIs that you've enabled, and then sort of like similar information, and basically usage of those APIs, so that you can figure out like what does my billing look like, what are people using the most, what is my app using the most from my users. Okay. And then if you click on the Library tab, that's where you go and enable and disable whichever Google APIs you want to use. They're not enabled by default, because that would be just too many resources that would have to be spun up. So you have to go and enable whichever ones you want to use. Okay? And so you can see this particular project, I don't remember when I took the screenshot, but this one uses Gmail, Calendar, Drive, Sheets, and the YouTube data API. I think I turned off all of the cloud APIs because this was not meant to be a cloud sample. And then the last tab is getting the credentials, and I have a whole bunch of slides on credentials. Okay, starting with this one. So you need credentials to talk to an API. There's 3 kinds. There's the API key kind, there's the OAuth client ID kind, and then there's a service account type. And different the APIs that you're going to use will require at least one of these. Typically, you're only going to use one type for the API that you're using. Some APIs can accept more than one of these, but typically you would just stay with the one you're most comfortable with. Who wants to go fiddle with security code? You want to build solutions, right? You don't want to muck with security code. It's not fun. All right, so I'm going to tell you which one of these 3 you're going to use for which APIs. Okay? So here are the 3 types. First one is API key. What are those used for? API keys are definitely the least secure of all the credentials. It's just a big giant hash, and the only thing that you can do with them on Google is access public data. I want to search for a location on Google Maps. I want to search for a YouTube video. I want to upload a sentence to the Cloud Natural Language API, or I want to upload a picture to the Cloud Vision API. Those things are considered public data, and so you don't really need anything more than an API key. Okay, everybody get that? Public data, API key, it's a hash, you cut and paste that, put it somewhere safe. When you're prototyping, yes, you can copy the string into the code, but be careful, because guess what happens if you upload your code to GitHub? The entire world has your API key, and boom, you have no more quota because it's been consumed by somebody in a very far away place that you don't know. Okay? They leak very easily. Fortunately, Google knows this, and so there's a way for you to lock down who has access to this API key. You can restrict it by IP address and things like that. Okay? The next kind are, okay, so that's simple. So it's basically not authorized except for the API key itself. The other 2 types are authorized. So OAuth client IDs are used when your app is trying to access data that's owned by a human user. Okay, so for example, you want to look at somebody's spreadsheet, or you want to add something to their Google Drive, a file to their Google Drive, or you want to add a video to somebody's playlist. Okay, those entities are owned by a human user, and that user must opt your code in, right? That user must give your code permission to access their data, right? Because otherwise it's a free-for-all. If you can get access to anybody's data, there's no security at all, right? So that's OAuth client IDs. So these are typically, oh yeah, I forgot to mention the product groups. So the public ones are Google Maps, YouTube, some YouTube, some cloud. The ones Data that's typically owned by users are workspace, right? Drive, Gmail, right? That's all stuff owned by users. Some YouTube, like a playlist, some cloud. All right, and then the last one is service accounts, and those are credentials to access data owned by an app or a robot user or app-to-app communication, right? There's no human user to give you permission to access that data, so it has to be done ahead of time, and that's what a service account is in service account permissions and roles. So that's done by cloud IAM permissions. The OAuth client IDs are granted on a per user basis, and the developer, you, have to basically state what permissions you're asking for. Okay, and then, you know, ever run a web app for the first time or install an Android app for the first time, probably even an iOS app, you get this little box that says this app needs your permission to do such and such, right? That's what I'm talking about. That is the OAuth permission scope. So now you are on the other side of the coin. You're asking your users for the permissions. So sometimes don't you feel that, why is this app asking for access to my contacts or whatever, right? Don't you feel like sometimes it's like it's asking for too much permissions? Like, I don't want to give this app permissions to my contacts or whatever. So the best practice for developers is now, because you're on the other side, try to ask for the minimal scopes that you need for your app to work. That way your users feel more comfortable installing your app, okay? All right, and so these are supported by GCP, of course, and some workspace APIs also support service accounts. I'll show you examples of that as well too. All right, so everybody understand the differences between the three? Okay, great. And then once you're done, you can look at all the ones that you've created. You can see all your API keys that you created. You can see all your OAuth 2 client IDs that you created. You can see all your service accounts that you created. It's all on one page. So you can go and delete them if you want. If you feel like, you know, somebody has access to something that you don't want them to have, you have full control over all the credentials that you've created. All right. All right. Now for probably the most important slide in this entire talk is, depending on which API you use, you're going to use one of these two different client library styles. First, we have the lower level kind, which are what I call platform level. So this is basically, you know, something kind of like the lowest common denominator, where it's so low level, it supports different Google products, okay? So the way you access APIs is you manage API service endpoints, you set them up and then you can use them. You manage the authorization, and typically the ones that fall into this category are Google Workspace, also analytics, YouTube, ads, APIs, and some cloud. All right, so this one client library can be downloaded here. I'll show you in a moment what languages we support, or Google supports. I think I wanted to say something else. Blah, 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 blah. Yeah, so one API client library lets you talk to all these products, basically, because it's so low level. Now, to make it easier for users, a bunch of products have decided to make product level client libraries, which are higher level. They are made specifically for each product or product family. Managing of API service endpoints is mostly taken care of. All you need is a client, an API client, and then you're good to go. And to install, so Google Cloud is one of the product groups that has product level client libraries, so you download it there. Maps also has client libraries, you download them there. And then some Google API families support both lower level as well as product level, okay? Cloud is one, all right? So I'll show you what they look like. Okay, so here's a little bit more about the client libraries. So this is the lower level client libraries for everything. This is the cloud-only client libraries, okay? And most major development languages are supported. My samples are mostly in Python and maybe JavaScript, maybe Node as well. I might have cut them out, but so apologies if you don't know Python. The good news about Python is you can just pretend it's executable pseudocode, because whatever language you do use, it's going to be similar the way you use APIs, okay? All right, cool. So again, simple APIs, simple API keys. Simple API access is for when you're searching for public information like locations on Google Maps and videos on YouTube, so you don't need any kind of authorization. But if you're trying to upload somebody's YouTube playlist or accessing their Drive files or just using any general cloud API, you need something that's authorized. So the code is going to look a little bit different depending on what you're going to use. So let's start with simple API access, lower level stuff, and generic products that support it, okay? So regardless of what language you use, you're going to have to import something, and then you'll have to have your API key somewhere, all right? So for prototyping, it's fine if you cut and paste the string itself into your code, but better if you put it somewhere else, like maybe Cloud Secret Manager or some kind of encrypted database or something that people can't guess or people can't copy or people can't see, and you can't leak your API key, because that's the only authorization that's allowed and that's available to you. And if somehow it gets compromised, then you have to destroy the API key, basically, and create a new one, okay? Once you have the API key, you would say, I want to build a service endpoint to whatever API, what version of the API, and then pass in the API key with a specific parameter. So for example, if I want to use the Cloud Natural Language API, I would use API equals language, version equals 1, and then developer key equals whatever that string is. Okay? So that's lower level, any product that supports simple API access with API keys. The next example is higher level. So this is an example from Google Maps. So in order to use Google Maps, you need an API key. But now we're not talking about the lower level client library. We're talking about the higher level Google Maps only client library. Okay, so you would import the Google Maps client library. You would also somehow get your API key. And then to use Google Maps, you would call Google Maps.client and then say key equals API key. And then you make whatever API calls you want. Okay, so that's an example of higher level, simple API access with an API key. Okay? Now, I'm not going to spend a lot of time talking about OAuth because that could probably be its own talk. All right, it's complicated because you need to have users giving you permission. Okay, so the main idea is you bring up the little box, the user says yes or no. If the user says yes, you get the credentials, valid credentials, and you can go and call the API. So there's a little bit of a handshake to make that happen. The user can also click no. I don't want to give permission to this app to access my data, in which case you have to handle the exception that comes back. Okay, so let's, okay. That's all I wanted to say there. All right, so let's see what this looks like. Unfortunately, with some languages like Python, Node, and maybe some other languages, Google has recently replaced their authentication libraries with newer stuff because the older stuff was relying on older libraries that are less maintained. So this is another thing that you won't see in the documentation. When you go and look up code samples of how to use a Google API in the docs, it's only going to show you the newest of everything. The latest client libraries, the latest authentication libraries, blah, blah, blah. But then when you go to like Stack Overflow or Quora or blog posts that are online, you go, wait a minute, this code is supposed to access the same API, but how come it looks so dang different? Okay, Google's not going to show you before and after. So that's why I do what I do. Okay, I need to show you what's changed. All right, so here's the old way of doing things. So the security code is a little bit more complicated, but you'll survive. Okay, so a few more imports. Okay, when you do OAuth, you need what is called an access token. Okay, and then it also comes with a refresh token so that you can access the API again without having to re-auth or re-ask the user for permissions. Okay, a lot of code doesn't do this. It doesn't store it, I guess for safety reasons, but then you kind of annoy your user because every time they run your app, they got to give permission to your code again. So I would say store it, but do it in a safe way. Okay, so I'm choosing to store it in a file called stores.json. I can probably put it in a secret directory. I can probably make it a dot file so that it's kind of pseudo hidden. All right, but just for testing purposes, I just call it stores.json. So I'm going to try to attempt to get a valid access token. If this does not have any credentials or the credentials have somehow been invalidated or have expired, then I need to actually make that OAuth flow, that permission box. Okay, so that's what this is. It creates that OAuth flow using, okay, so what is client secret? So remember how in the Cloud Console, once you turn on the APIs, you have to go and click credentials, and you would click, I want to create OAuth client ID. Once you're done creating it, it'll say, do you wish to download that file? And it will give you a file name of client secret and some gigantic hash. I just shortened it to client secret. All right, but it's actually more than the secret. It's a client ID and a client secret. It's got two values in it that are important. It takes that, it merges the permission scopes that you're asking for. So in that little box, it says this app needs your permission to take a look at your drive files, modify your spreadsheets, all those things. Those are all permission scopes. In your code, they will look like URLs, but those URLs get translated into a very nice string in whatever locale language that you're using, and it will ask the user for it. It won't prompt the user with a big, giant, ugly-looking URL. The URL just leads to the string that is for your locale. Okay? So you'll have either a single string for one array, or you'll have an array of strings here. Okay? And then once you have so it takes the permissions that you want, it merges it with the credentials file, and then it builds a little box, and then you have to display the box and have the user answer yes or no. And if they answer yes, you have valid credentials. Now I can build a service endpoint to this API, which was whatever version. I want to sign all requests, so I create an HTTP client, and I say I want to authorize all calls to the server for this user. It's going to be encrypted. Okay. So for example, if I want to talk to the Sheets API, I would say API equals Sheets, version equals 4, and then the user, when the user clicked allow. Okay? So there's another video on this one. Now, how did this change? The new auth libraries, okay, so Google made it slightly harder. Okay, so there's going to be a little bit more code. So the thing that Google no longer does, at least not in Python, is it no longer manages this file for you. So you have this file.storage and store.get. So it's very convenient because it does all the things for you. But the new library doesn't, so you have to manage that file yourself. So the newer code is going to be a little longer. Oh, darn it. Okay, sorry, didn't call these out. Newer is a little bit longer. All right, still I'm going to use storage.json, but now I have to check if it exists. If it exists, I'm going to try and grab the stuff out of it. Same kind of if statement. Do I not have creds, or are they invalid? And if they've expired and I have a refresh token, can I automatically do a refresh, or do I actually need to bring up that box in front of the user again? So in this case, I do. The else means I do. So I'm going to create the flow, same way of creating the flow. Now I run the flow, and then now I write that file out to whatever was the old one. I just write over the old one, if there was one. And then I can create my API service endpoint again. So it's almost identical, but a little bit longer, because I think the other languages don't manage the file either. So why should Python do it? Because now the Python version is different than all the other languages. So they wanted to make it consistent, but that just means more work for the Python developer. Boo-hoo. All right. But all of the documentation, like if you use all the workspace APIs, they have the new one now. This is all you'll see. You won't see the old one. But when you look at old blog posts, it's going to have the other one. So you need to be able to tell. If you see HTTP lib2 and OAuth 2 client, old. Okay, look for google.auth something or OAuth. Okay, that's new, at least for Python. I started to investigate the Node stuff, but I didn't get very far in it. I think Node came along much later, so even the old Node library wasn't that different from the new one. So, okay.
Quick question.
Yeah, sure.
Does this flow handle the UI as well? Or
Yeah. It brings up the UI. Yep. If you're in an environment where everything must be command line only, there's a way to do that, where the flow is a console type. This one will actually throw up a web server and a browser, and it'll actually make the flow go through a web browser. But you can choose the command line one too. Okay? All right. I'm not good with following my boxes, so okay. Now let's talk about service accounts, the third type. Okay? So this is lower level if you use permission scopes, and it's using the older auth libraries and any API that it works with. Okay, so it's just a slightly different incantation. Now, when you create a service account, you'll also be prompted to download it, but you only get one download. Yeah, and if you somehow lose that file, you have to just delete that service account key and recreate a new one. Okay, and the creating the service endpoint is pretty similar. Okay, so it's a little bit easier because you're not having to ask the user for permission. That's why it's shorter. There's no user handshake involved. Okay, let's see. So the next one is low level, but instead of using permission scopes, you're using IAM. So now you're relying on cloud IAM permissions. Very similar, but you have the application default credentials library that does all the heavy lifting for you. So the code is much easier, and then you just pass in the credentials. Okay. Newer, even shorter, similar. Okay. I know a lot of code samples, right? But they're all different, which makes me sad sometimes. But you have to know, because otherwise, you're going to search and you're going to see code samples of all these different kinds scattered everywhere online, and it's going to confuse the heck out of you as to which one you need to use. So I'm being very specific. I'm telling you what they are so that you can identify them at least. Okay. All right. So here's an example. I think this is an example. Yeah, this is an actual example, okay, of a specific one. This is the higher level libraries. It uses IAM permissions, it's newer, and it's a specific API. So this is cloud storage, GCS. From google.cloud import storage. Oh my gosh, I can just do storage.client. I don't have to do any security code because it's all handled by application default credentials with this one line. Once I have an API client, I can just say bucket blob is my file, and then I want to upload this file from my local hard drive up to GCS. Okay. All right, so now that you've gotten the basics as to what the boilerplate looks like, now we can go look at all the APIs. So one final word is how our Google APIs work. It's almost always a request response workflow. There's very few exceptions. There are some, but very few. You can ask me later what those exceptions are. Your application makes a request to a Google API. The Google API ensures you have the correct credentials. If that is true, it services your request and sends a response back to the application. Okay, very, very much client server. Okay, am I going too fast? Everybody good? Enjoying the pizza, food coma, and all that kind of stuff? Okay, all right, great. Awesome, cool. All right, so I'm going to talk about workspace APIs first. So first I have to apologize. There's going to be some marketing slides in here. I'm sorry. It's just that most people think, oh, workspace, that's Gmail, Drive, Calendar, DocSheet, Slides. Those are for users, okay? Without really knowing that they're also for developers too. But like I said earlier, the workspace APIs is the largest collection of non-cloud APIs. So that's why I show them, okay? So yes, workspace, all these wonderful apps. I don't know what the next name is. Okay, it used to be called Google Apps, and then at some point people called it Google Drive, even though that didn't make any sense. Then they renamed it to G Suite. Then they renamed it to Workspace. So every time Google hires a new VP, they want to leave their mark. Change the name of this product suite. Okay, it's just a trend. It's just that I noticed. All right, but most importantly for all of you is that there's APIs. So APIs this is the Google developer symbol. So that means they're APIs. But there's something else here. I'll talk about this towards the end. Okay. They did not take down the G Suite name. I'm too lazy to type workspace because then it would make this line wrap. So I just left it at G Suite. So just think of it as a short link. Yeah, exactly. So I'm lazy and I don't want my slide to wrap. Okay. Okay. So Google Drive. If somebody gave you a homework assignment, write a piece of code that dumps out the first 100 files and folders in somebody's Google Drive, you would be hard-pressed to guess that it only was 4 lines long. Okay? The rest of it is imports and security code. Okay, so here's my imports. Okay? Those of you who are Python developers know that we are trying to get rid of Python 2 so that we were only on Python 3 before Python 4 comes around. But that's difficult because in real life, a lot of companies there's so much Python 2 code in the wild, you just can't go cold turkey. So I always add something like this line at the top so that at least my prints don't break. All right, I can make my prints work on Python 2 and 3 with just that import alone. This import is ignored in Python 3, but in Python 2, it lets me write Python 3 code that runs on Python 2. Okay? And then all the imports that you saw earlier in the samples. Okay, so here's my permissions. Remember, again, try to ask for the minimal permissions. In this case, I'm not going to create files on their Google Drive. I'm not even going to look at the contents of their files because that's privacy. I only want to access the metadata. In fact, I'm not even going to modify the metadata. So I just want read-only access to their metadata. This is the most restrictive scope I can ask for to make this app work. Okay, so then notice this code is identical to what you saw in the samples. Identical, there's no change at all. Okay, so now I'm ready to go create the endpoint to the Drive API. So discovery.build Google Drive API version 3, and then the credentials if the user clicked allow. Okay, now I'm going to go into the files collection of methods. I'm going to call the list method in that collection. By default, it will return me 100 files and folders. If I wanted to be more specific, I think it's called max results. You can say max results equals 25 or 1,000 if you don't want 100. Then I have a query. Then I execute the query. And then I have a big giant JSON payload that I get back. If for some reason they're a new user and they have 0 files in their Google Drive, there is no entry in the JSON object that comes back, so I have to assign it an empty array so that my for loop doesn't fail on the next line. So for file f in files, print the name and the MIME type. Okay, this is the older auth libraries. Changing it to the newer, oh, by the way, there's also a video on this one too. The newer auth libraries, again, a little bit more code, so you have to manage it. All right, I pickle it. Pickling is basically a way of serializing the byte stream. Okay. But then the app is exactly the same. There's no change to the app at all. It's just the middle section that changed. The scope doesn't change either. Okay.
Are there page tokens? Do you have to deal with that as well too on this, or is that handled in Python?
Yeah. Sure. I think that is a feature of the Drive API. So you would manage it here. Like if you did 1,000 and you wanted to page through or something like that. Right? Is that what? Yeah. Right. So it's not related to the user auth code. It's a functionality. Yeah. Same thing goes for like if you do like resumable uploads and downloads on Drive, you have to have something.
Specifically this list one, I know if you get a lot of results, it's like it's on pages.
Yeah, probably. I think there's like a max that they can return, and then you have to paginate through. But check the API documentation. And also, always check the quick start. My code is always different from the quick start because, in my opinion, I'm kind of snooty. I don't like the quick starts. I think they usually have too much code, and it adds more noise. So I like to have shorter code samples. There was one time I took their quick starts and I reduced them from 45 lines down to 17. But then they had to switch to this, and I was already on a different team by then. So apologies. I'm just kind of a Python snooty person because I've been doing it for too long. I can see bad code just by looking at it. So forgive me. Sorry. OK, so now let's use a service account. OK, because maybe I shared a Drive file with a service account, which is an email address. And I want to access it. Now, I don't want to ask a user for permissions because my service account is doing stuff for me in the cloud. I just want to peek in and grab some stuff from Drive and process it and move on. Okay, so this is what it looks like. So again, there's no users to ask for permission. It uses the new libraries, and service account uses application default credentials, and whatever service account has the permissions to access this. So same code, basically. Okay? All right. Why would you do this? Okay, here's the marketing slide. Why would you even consider using the Drive API if you've never used it before? Well, for one thing, is Google Drive is a very popular place for people to go dump out their phones when they're back from vacation. So, because my phone's always full, I want to dump out all the pictures. If it doesn't automatically get backed up by Google Photos, I'm going to dump it in Drive. Same thing goes for like old cameras that are not your phone. All right. The problem with that is if you dump all the stuff in your Drive looks like this, your pictures look like this. You don't know what they're for, you don't know when, you don't know where, you have no clue, right? But using the Drive API, you can analyze the metadata for these images. So you can kind of figure out, oh, timestamp, oh, this might be vacation week. And then you can also look at the geolocation, lat long, like, oh, I was in Hawaii in January. Then I was, in, Breckenridge in March to go skiing or something, right? You can kind of automate creating photo albums just by using the Drive API. And maybe you want to build a slide deck for grandma so she can scroll through it. So you can use the Slides API to put one picture on each slide and then send her a slide deck using the Gmail API. Or you can stitch all your photos together, use some CPU power, and generate an MP4 video and upload it to YouTube using the YouTube API. And then emailing the link to your grandma using the Gmail API. So I'm just sort of planting seeds as to, like, if you kind of like mix and match different Google APIs, what kind of things can you do? So it's up to y'all to use your imaginations, for like what you would consider to do personally, as well as what you may want to do at work if you're a workspace customer. Okay. Sheets API. Of all the different office productivity software, I think spreadsheets are probably the most programmable, right? It kind of like makes sense. You can use it as a backup for your relational database. You can back up the most important rows into a spreadsheet. You can even add charts and stuff. Some people go the other way. That's why there's arrows pointing the other way. They have a very important spreadsheet, but just in case Google somehow corrupts my spreadsheet, I'm going to back up all the rows and columns to a relational database or something. Okay, so that's possible. If you've never used the Sheets API before, one of my colleagues at the time created a code lab using Node.js. So it's a customized reporting tool of a fictitious toy company, and it comes with a fictitious toy database, which I'm going to use right here, actually. So I made a video on this one as well, too. This is where I'm going to do the opposite. I'm going to take all the data that's in the database. I'm going to read it out using select, so all of the toy orders. Okay, once I have all the rows, you have to realize that spreadsheets don't have like column names, so you have to actually do it yourself. So I'm going to take this, I'm going to stick it in as row 0. So that's the first row that's written into my spreadsheet. Okay. So pretend all the lines that you saw on the Drive page here, or actually here, pretend all these lines already exist, and then I had sheets equals discovery.build sheets version 4. Pretend all that stuff has already been written. Okay, then I can say sheets.spreadsheets, create a brand new spreadsheet, call it customer orders, and give me back the spreadsheet ID because I need that. So I make this call to create the spreadsheet. I get the spreadsheet ID back. I save it in a variable. Now I can add that stuff to the spreadsheet by using the update method from the values collection, pass in that ID. I want to stick the data in starting at A1 in the upper left corner. Here are my rows, and then I want to just write out the raw data and then execute it, and then I'm done. Okay, so this is a code snippet of how you would move data out of a relational database into a spreadsheet using the Sheets API. All right, fairly straightforward. Everybody gonna get this? Okay, good. All right, now why the Slides API? Well, maybe you have a bunch of stuff in a spreadsheet, okay, like you're gonna go visit some customers or something, and you want to auto-generate some slides given like the chart that's in the spreadsheet or whatever, and the customer information. Okay, another colleague of mine wrote a code lab to teach you how to use the Slides API in Node, where you use BigQuery to analyze a ton of open source projects in GitHub and what licenses they use. Okay, it's kind of cute. Or maybe you're a salesperson and you're visiting 6 customers, but you need the same slide deck customized for each customer. So you read those out of a spreadsheet and you auto-generate 6 identical slide decks, except the client name is different, the corporate logo is different, yada, yada, yada. Okay? Yet another coworker who's actually going to be in town, actually he's already in town tomorrow, he wrote something where you can actually write a slide deck in Markdown and auto-generates into Google Slides. So that's a pretty cool app. I use it. No, who's Justin? Oh yeah, his name is Steve. But yeah. Basil? Yeah. Mm-hmm. So he wrote this. It's a pretty cool app. I use it in real life, actually. Okay, so how would you do that? Well, I have a bunch of placeholders like company name and corporate logo, and then I say replace all my company names with whatever the company name is that I read out of the spreadsheet, and then replace everything that I have, with my logo placeholder with some image of my customer's corporate logo, and then boom, just again, I already have the permissions up at the top. I already did slides equals discovery.build slides API v1, I think, and so on. I don't want anything back, so fields is blank. Optional, if you don't say I don't want anything back, it will send you some stuff back. All right. So fields tells you, you tell the API what you want back if you want anything back. If you want it to run faster because you don't care what comes back, you just want to make sure it's been done, then just set it to blank, which means I don't want anything. Don't send anything back. Just come back. Give me the 200 and nothing. Okay. Video on this one. And then I'm not going to walk through the rest of these, but this is like the Gmail API. Like if I care about all threads that have more than 10 messages because I know it's a busy thread. All right, because I'm on a ton of mailing lists. I only want to read all the email from important threads. So I would maybe like use the Gmail API to like star it or something so that I could just see the stars when I log into Gmail. So you can kind of like automate things to make your life more convenient with Gmail, right? And then same thing goes for calendar. I can automate dinner with friends. I mean, by itself, this example is kind of dumb because you wouldn't write well, maybe some of you would write code if you wanted to set up a dinner with friends. Okay, but more realistically, you work for a company that helps with travel bookings or doctor bookings or something, and if somebody does it on your website, you want to automatically stick something in their calendar because otherwise they have to wait for your email and they have to go manually create it in their Google Calendar. Be nice to your users, do it for them, right? And then same thing goes for what if they can't make their doctor's appointment, they change it to next week. Well, you don't want the wrong thing to stick in the calendar, right? You want to automatically change it. Okay, so there's lots of good uses for using the calendar API, okay? And so between Drive, Sheets, and Calendar, those are like the videos that I have that have the most views because they're obvious use cases, right? Okay, cool. All right, so the last one is multiple APIs, mail merge. I have a form letter from to, I have all the data in the spreadsheet, okay? And I want this to change to this. Okay, so that's kind of the goal. So the code, made a video on this one as well. Code looks like this. So if you wanted to know, well, you showed us examples of how to use one API with one permission scope. What does it look like if I want to have multiple permissions and I want to use multiple APIs? So that's this, well, plus this. Okay, so you need different permissions. I need to create Google Docs, so I need Drive API. Well, I need to read and write files, so that's Drive. I need to do stuff with Google Docs, that's that scope. I need to do stuff with Google Sheets, that's that scope. Since I'm reading from the sheets, I could probably do spreadsheets.read-only. Okay, that would be safer. But then I would just create 3 different endpoints to talk to all 3 APIs, basically. And then I would like read all the names from the spreadsheet, and then I would create a brand new, I would copy a template that I had in Google Drive. All right, so that's basically the form letter template. I would copy it. And then for every single one, so this is also still in the for loop, by the way. I want to replace, name with name, address with address, and so on, and then just execute it as a batch, which is great because this is an array, so you can just stick in all of them in here. Everything you want to change in a single document, and then that's inside the for loop for all documents. All right, so that is a multi-API example. All right, so that is non-cloud APIs. Now it gets a little tricky because now I'm going to show you some cloud APIs, but I'm going to show you both using cloud client libraries, product level client libraries, but also what it looks like when you're using lower level client libraries because that's all you've seen so far. All right, so Cloud Platform has a ton of APIs. Can't even begin, they keep on adding new ones, so I can't keep up with them anymore. So cloud storage. So you recognize discovery.build. In this case, I don't have credentials here because I'm going to rely on the IAM permissions. Okay, so service account basically, and then I'm going to create specify a bucket in my cloud storage. Overall, some cloud storage bucket, and then I'm going to list all the files that are in it. Okay, so this is using the lower level. You know what discovery.build does. Now let's switch to using the cloud storage client library and see what changes. First, it's usually going to be shorter. Okay, and typically I would do from google.cloud import the thing, in this case storage. Now I say storage.client, boom, I'm done, and then list, it's even easier. I don't know why my print even looks easier than this print. I should make, oh no, these are similar. I think this one, I'm handling if I didn't get anything back or something like that, whereas this one, I have to go back and double check this sample. I didn't spend a lot of time with storage because that wasn't my area. I just made them work and then I moved on. It happens quite a bit when I'm working in areas I'm not assigned to, okay? I just did it because I wanted to show I could do it, okay? Another example, talking to Firestore or Data Store, okay, using the Data Store client library. Ooh, I don't have the old version. Do I have the old version? Oh, I might have deleted it. Dang it. Okay, so I had one using the old lower level one, and this is the replacement for Data Store client from google.cloud import Data Store. Oh, I think I know why, because I wanted to appease all the Node.js users. Like, here's the Node.js version. Please like me. I'm not a Python bigot. I'm learning Node, okay? Actually, I should probably add async and await to my Python samples too, because now Python has that feature. All right, so that was my fault. Let's look at BigQuery. Okay, here's something familiar. Discovery.build BigQuery API version 2 credentials, and then somewhere up above I have my security code. I have some query, and then I run the query, and then I dump out the values. Now let's switch to the BigQuery client library. From google.cloud import BigQuery. Same thing here. Same thing here. I think the prints are a little bit easier because I think I was able to put them all on one line. Kind of nasty to see 2 for loops on one line in Python, so apologies, but it fit. And it's not impossible to read versus this one, which is embedded, okay? So anyway, so the main point is not my implementation, but the usage, the usage of the difference between using a lower level client library and a product level client library. That's what I wanted to get across, okay? And then like here are the answers to that. This was, I used to ask people all the time, what are the most common words that Shakespeare wrote? If you took everything that Shakespeare wrote and dumped it all in a database and sorted every single word and then counted them, what are the most common words, right? So I would ask you guys, raise your hands if you guys know what the most common words that Shakespeare wrote are. And you would say, not thou, don't say thou. Okay, see, the, right? Yeah, a question?
Oh, sorry, was that a rhetorical for the computer?
Sure. Or you could give me your answer. What would your answer be?
Let's see, for Shakespeare?
Yeah.
Not thou.
Yeah.
Probably thine?
Oh, you're so honest, but here are the answers. It was right in front of you, just weren't looking. Great. But you're honest, though. I like that. Honesty counts. It's actually the and, like normal people. I know it's surprising. But anyway, so BigQuery, if you don't know what BigQuery is, if you've never played with it, it's probably the most fun Google Cloud product there is. You can query all kinds of crazy stuff. We have all kinds of weird like public data sets, like all of Shakespeare. You know, of course, Shakespeare only had plain text in his day. He didn't have multimedia. So, you know, BigQuery is really meant to search multi-terabytes of data, not 36.5 meg, which is what Shakespeare wrote. So other interesting data sets you can look at are like the neonatality database from the Department of Health and Human Services. You can do things like, what was the average birth weight of babies born to mothers between 1956 and 1971 who were smokers versus non-smokers, right? And you're going through a terabyte of data, and you get back the results, oh, it turns out that for moms that smoked, their children were about 1 pound lighter than moms that did not smoke. And that's interesting insight that you wouldn't be able to get because there was no database back then, right? But now that you can troll through terabytes of data in just seconds, you can find out interesting things. There's also like weather station data from the 1920s. There's like all of GitHub, Wikipedia and stuff like that. So you can do all kinds of fun queries. And by the way, BigQuery is the only tool that you can use in Google Cloud for completely free every month with no credit card. just a Google login is all you need. So everybody gets 1 terabyte of queries they can make a month. That is 1 terabyte of data that you're querying. You can hit that in one shot, right? So just be aware of that. It's free, okay? Completely free. You don't even need a project, all right? So just look up BigQuery Sandbox. And of course, in today, oh yeah, here's a link to it. And then you can also read the blog post. But because of COVID, there's a whole ton of interesting COVID data sets that you can look at as well. And if you're interested in the healthcare field, there's a healthcare API and a life sciences API, which is really just biogenomics. If you didn't know that cloud had that kind of stuff. Okay, the healthcare API is more for moving things between unrelated medical systems, making them talk to each other, kind of a thing. So just FYI, public service announcement. Okay, so Vision API. So discovery.build, Cloud Vision API. This one, again, you don't need anything more than an API key to make things simple. I'm going to pass it an image, this image right here. You can probably guess what it looks like, but I'm going to say, hey, Vision API, tell me what you see in this picture, and then display it and the confidence score. Switching over to the Cloud Vision client library, same image. I get a client, API client, and then I call label detect and do the same thing. So you can just tell code is a little bit shorter, not too much shorter, but you have to kind of like specify a lot of information at the lower level. That's why it's lower level, right? You have to do more legwork versus it's all taken care of by objects in the client library, right? And then here's the picture. And there's people, transport, and things like that, okay? Cloud Vision is very interesting. If you don't know anything about AI, ML, all of the AI, ML APIs help you with it, help you get up to speed, because you don't have to know anything about machine learning in order to use machine learning. All you need to know is how to call an API. So if you're new to AI, ML, and you want to get into it, this is the best and fastest way of doing it, because you start getting the terminology, you start figuring out what it is, you take some tutorials online, and then all of a sudden, then you're going to be breaking out into PyTorch, TensorFlow, or scikit-learn, or some of the other well-known libraries. Okay? All right, so that's cloud, showing you lower level and product level. Now let's just a quick, like 3 or 4 slides on other Google APIs. They may require lower level, or they may have their own product level. So for example, well, okay, so here are some other systems. So Firebase is our mobile development platform. It has its own set of APIs and client libraries. Data Studio is if you want to build like a beautiful visualization dashboards. If you want to build voice-driven apps, use Actions on Google. YouTube has APIs, Maps has APIs, and then Flutter is the latest hotness. So if you want to write a web app, an Android app, and an iOS using one code base, that's what Flutter does. It's kind of like React Native, probably. I think so. I'm not 100% sure. I don't work on that team. I don't know anything about it. Yeah, but look it up. Look it up. I'm sure a lot of GDGs have Flutter, like code gems and stuff like that. So. Yeah. See. Yeah. There's always a better library every 5 years, right? All right, so YouTube is one of the APIs that you have to use the lower level. So you have to do discovery.build, okay? If you search for videos, you can use an API key, but if you want to update a playlist, you need to actually have OAuth client ID, okay? Maps, on the other hand, has its own product level client libraries. I kind of already showed you an example earlier, but this is a more full-fledged sample, and it actually shows you executing it as well. Maps has about 12 different APIs. Not as big as Workspace, okay, but they have their own product level client libraries. I think you can still use the lower level ones too. They just don't document it, so I don't have any code samples. All right, so the last thing, I do want to say something about AppScript, because if you like the idea of using Google APIs, but REST, OAuth, HTTP, maybe you don't like that. Maybe it's too much for you. Maybe you want to ease into it. That's what AppScript is for. All right, AppScript is, how many people have heard of AppScript before? See, in a room that's a GDG, only like quarter of you raised your hand. So it's a secret. It's another Google secret. It's not a secret. It's been around since 2008. People just don't know about it. Okay, what is it? It is JavaScript. It is specifically server-side JavaScript like Node.js. Okay, it is not client-side form validation JavaScript. Okay. But it's not like using APIs. It's more like using built-in objects instead. You don't have to worry about security code because it's automatically generated for you. And it's server-side, but it's not like Node because it's not meant for fast asynchronous web processing. Okay, it's code that lives in Google, so it's serverless. All right, and it runs in Google, and you can talk to lots of Google products, but you can also call externally to relational database using JDBC. You can use URL fetch, talk to any service that's reachable online. Okay, so it is not Node, but it is server-side. Okay, so here's an example. This is a one-line JavaScript program, a one-line program. I just broke it out into 4 lines so you could read it easier. But talk to a Google Sheet, get the current active sheet, get cell A1, and write hello world into it. Okay, save it and run it. Although a lot of young kids today don't know why this is the save button. They don't know what this icon is. So anyway, if you young kids don't know what it is, ask some of the more veterans in here, okay? They'll know. Anyway, save it, run it. When you do run it, you also get the OAuth permissions because guess what? You're reading from somebody's sheet. No, this one you're writing to them. So you have to get permission from the user that owns the spreadsheet, okay? So the OAuth does happen, but look, there's no OAuth code here. Okay, and then boom, you get this. And it's like exciting. Why? Not because of the contents, but because you had code doing it. You didn't sit there and type it in, so that's why it's exciting. And I made a video on this one as well too. All right, that's not useful. This is more useful because it's actually a piece of data, like real data. So this is the Google New York office. So cell A2. So I'm gonna blow that up from a 1-line to a 4-line application and make it do something slightly more useful, like 1, connect to the spreadsheet. 2, grab cell A2, this time get the value instead of setting it, save it as address. Then I can say, hey, Google Maps, can you make me a new map and put a pin or a marker on that address? And then line 4 is, hey, Gmail, can you email this map to my friend so that I can go to Google New York and have lunch with someone there? Okay, so this is a 4-line application, and it touches at least 4 different Google products. But again, it doesn't have to be Google. You can use JDBC or URL fetch and talk to anything else. Okay? So that's that. That's a code lab that I wrote and a video that I made. So notice there's no OAuth, there's no HTTP, there's no nothing. So this is addictive. That's why I showed this last. Once you get coding like this, you don't want to use REST APIs anymore.
Will you explain bound scripts versus non-bound scripts?
That's a separate talk for another time.
I meant just
Yeah. So in general, super high level, a bound script is bound to a document like a spreadsheet, a Google Doc, a slide presentation, blah, blah, blah. Unbound scripts are just general like JavaScript running and doing stuff. So yeah, so is it bound to a Google document or not? And by document, it's not just Google Docs, it's also Docs, Sheets, Slides, Forms as well too.
The one nice thing about that is because it's bound to that document, you don't have to call a lot of that stuff.
That's right.
You can just say get active, you can get information off the user, all kinds of stuff just automatically.
Yep, and then similarly, companies can install AppScript add-ons so that they can be used by everybody in the company, and not every employee doesn't have to opt into that specific one.
And the AppScript copies if you copy the bound sheet. So if you copy
That's
the
right.
spreadsheet, the AppScript goes with it.
Right, so the question is,
In deployment.
right, so the whole thing, so it's copied. So if you have a document like a spreadsheet that has a built-in script and you copy that spreadsheet, it will also make a copy of the AppScript code that's bound to that spreadsheet. So you can kind of like move it along, basically. So pretty useful. Question?
Does it work with Tableau as well?
Will it work with Tableau?
Yeah.
What do you mean by work with?
If I have to extract and play around with, the only way to play around with Google Maps API using Tableau is using the REST API. But if I have to go through this route, then I will have to go to Google Data Studio, because Tableau doesn't let you play around with it. It only syncs to Google Maps API, not any other Google product.
Yeah, so in that case, if it doesn't have built-in functionality, you have to use a REST API. AppScript also has a REST API, which means that you can actually write a script and then use the API to call into that script.
Oh, and call in libraries. So there's a lot of libraries you can pull in. So you don't have to write everything. But then you can pull in, you can do REST inside of there. So if, like,
Yeah, you can make OAuth calls in.
Yeah, one bad thing right now is like the Drive API is pinned back in AppScript, right? I think we're still on Drive
3.
V2,
Yeah.
which is bad because you really want V3 at least.
Yeah, V3 had a bunch of performance improvements, that's true. But it's up to each product team to rev it. So another problem at Google is there's never enough resources because there's always higher priority items. So it kind of sucks. So you just need to create the issue in the issue tracker and just keep on starring it. See, the squeaky wheel is the only way to get things done. So, okay, cool. Good questions, everybody. So what can you do with that app? You can manage your user group meetings with it. Maybe a book club meeting, user group meeting. Maybe you want to visit 4 of your biggest customers in New York. Remember, when you have access to the Maps APIs, you also have access to like driving directions, or in New York's case, public transit directions, or even walking directions, right? You have access to every product has APIs that provide functionality. Using AppScript, you have access to whatever the product team has made available for you. Typically, it's a lot. Maybe not everything. Sometimes you do have to use the REST APIs because AppScript doesn't do everything. Okay? Okay, so last thing is to show you some inspiration. Okay, I'm going to mix and match, or maybe not mix and match. Maybe I'm going to mix and match, or maybe I'm going to just show lower level stuff, and then maybe some inspiration. So one of the biggest apps, or not biggest apps, but one of the most interesting apps I wrote recently is related to, well, it's an AI-enhanced image archival service, I would say. Okay, so what do I mean by that? What I mean is, let's say that you're in specific industries that have a lot of images. Manufacturing, architecture, or entertainment, right? These fields are where if you work for a company and you guys use Workspace, you're going to have tons of drive folders for every time you do a project, and then when you move to another project, you have a ton more. And so the net effect of this is, or after a couple of years, this is what your drive folder looks like. When you log into Google Drive, it looks like a organized or disorganized mess. The other thing about being in those 4 industries is once you're done with a project, once the building is done, once the TV show has aired, once the bridge has been built or whatever, you're probably not going to refer to those files fairly regularly, yet they show up at the top of your drive when you sign into it, right? So let's clean up my drive by backing them up to what I call colder storage that is fairly cheap, and I don't need to access it, but it's available for me if I do. And so that's cloud storage. So cloud storage gives you 4 different storage tiers depending on how often you access it. Okay, and so I want to take these files and declutter my drive and move a bunch of this stuff to cold storage. If I use the coldest storage, it's cheaper than Drive. Okay. Unless of course you have the highest Workspace edition where you get unlimited storage and stuff like that. Okay, but I want to know what those images are, because when I'm backing them up, I don't want to just throw it's like that example I showed you about why would you use a Drive API in your photos from your vacations. You don't want to just throw all those images in one giant cloud storage bucket. You want to figure out what you backed up. So maybe I want to use the Cloud Vision API and analyze each of those images that I'm backing up so that I can kind of like maybe search for them later, right? And in fact, if I do use the Cloud Vision API to analyze it, I need to store that analysis somewhere. Why don't I do it in a spreadsheet, okay? So that if I'm backing up these folders, maybe I can call the archive name, maybe it's a zip file, or maybe it's a folder name. Maybe I can, back up the file name. I can say what kind of image it is, when was the last time it was updated, how big it is, and use the output of the Vision API to give me clarity as to what those images are, and maybe build some kind of mini querying engine on it so that I can search for all pictures of traffic signs or landmarks or something, so I can find those again. And it'd be even cooler if I hyperlinked the exact location on cloud storage so that when I click on it, it will actually go into GCS and actually return that image to me. Okay, so this is kind of a useful spreadsheet to me. So this is an interesting app because it takes stuff that's in Workspace and it moves it to cloud storage, which is GCP. Then I want to categorize that image with Cloud Vision. And then I want to record the results into a sheet. Okay, so this is a 4-product sample. And here's what it looks like if I were to build it with all lower level. Notice how consistent it looks. I have my scopes here. I have my discovery that builds one after another. Drive API version 3, GCS v1, Vision v1, Sheets v4. And I'm using the same HTTP endpoint that's signed with my same credentials that my user has authorized, giving me access to all of these APIs. Read only for Drive, because I don't need to write anything to Drive. Okay, this looks great. But the higher level, product level client libraries perform better. So we always recommend that you use the cloud storage client library, not this low level thing. And then same thing goes for Vision. Cloud Vision also has a client library too. So if I were to switch this to using the cloud client libraries, it would look like this. Back and forth. So you can see what the deltas are. Creating of the API endpoint slightly different. And of course, I had to import it up at the top. But everything else stays the same, okay? But I like the old way because this looks very consistent to me. You know, in fact, I could probably automate this and not have 4 lines that look like this. I could probably have a for loop executing these, right? But I'm not taking advantage of the higher level stuff, so you know, it's hard, right? Let's look at the code. Using the old way, cloud storage, insert this object, analyze it with Cloud Vision, add to the spreadsheet. Oh, I forgot about grabbing the file from Drive. So this is your driver, the whole driver. So the italicized stuff. This is like the main driver. First, I get the image from Drive. I get 4 pieces of metadata: file name, MIME type, timestamp, and the actual media. Then I will take the file name, give it the cloud storage bucket, take my media and then the MIME type, and I'll actually create that file, insert that file on cloud storage. Then I take the data and then I pass it into Cloud Vision, which takes the top, I think top 5. Where is top? Well, top is 5. I don't think I have the thing that calls main, so it's the top 5 labels. Because like this spreadsheet here, this spreadsheet only has, yeah, the top 5, okay? Okay, so that's this. Now, let's change this to the higher level product level client libraries and go back and forth. Notice that everything is identical except for calling cloud storage, which this time it's not shorter, it's about the same. Vision is a little bit shorter. Yeah, a little bit shorter because I don't have to give it all that data. Right? The lower level stuff, you have to basically build the JSON structure, the metadata structure, versus the client library client objects have that stuff built in. So anyway, this is, I'm trying to imagine a real life use case and I built it. It uses 4 different Google products. I wrote a blog post on it. If you want to build this line by line, I wrote a code lab for it. And of course, if you want to get access to the code, I put in a repo. When you go to the repo, if you want to see all the other versions with service accounts, old auth libraries, new auth libraries, like there's like another 7 versions in the alt folder, so ALT. Look in the alt folder if you want to see the other derivations of the same thing. But I think the main one is everything old. Because they haven't shut it down yet. I know Google say it's deprecated, but it hasn't been shut down yet. So all the old stuff still works and it makes my code consistent and short, so that's why I like it. But anyway, so that's that. All right, so let's wrap up. So Google provides more than just apps, and you cannot wait for Google to write every single app for your life because you can make money if you write apps that people use. All right, make money fast. Anybody remember that? Okay, write apps that people use. So Google is much more than Search, YouTube, Android, Chrome, and Gmail Docs, right? you can leverage Google technology because a lot of it is available to developers from APIs. Now, if you're using cloud versus non-cloud, you may notice that there's a difference. And the main reason is because of lower level versus product level client libraries. The lower level may be useful as the lowest common denominator. Unfortunately, it's inconsistent to you, the users, because these were all done by different Google teams at different times with different priorities, different budgets. So I apologize on behalf of my former employer, but that's just the way it is. My job is to try and help smoothen it over for you so that you can sort of understand everything that's going on so you can make an informed decision and code it appropriately. Okay? And you can build interesting things if you actually use different Google product APIs anyway. All right? Okay, so final review. There's two different types of client libraries, lower level, higher level. There's three different credentials types, and depending on what APIs you use, you'll have to pick one of these three. Okay, but now at least you know what they are. Okay, and which APIs may use one versus another. Yeah. Additional resources, all the docs can be had at cloud.google.com/any GCP product. Same thing goes for developers.google.com for workspace products. We have a bunch of code labs. So code labs are self-paced hands-on tutorials. You do need a Google account, but they're always free. So Workspace has a couple that I've written, or I have actually the Drive is the only one that I did. These are done by two other colleagues. Cloud has a whole ton. I'm not even going to list them out. You just go to this. If that link breaks because they forgot to renew the domain, then just go to g.co/codelab/cloud. And if you remove the /cloud, you get all the Google Code Labs, all of them, all products. Cloud Skills Boost are if you you don't need a Google account, but typically they're not free. So these basically, a lot of employers just buy like a subscription for these. So they're more professional type of code labs. You don't need a Google account because what happens is they provision a new Google account every time you do the code lab, and then it destroys it when you're done. Okay, tons of videos, tons of code samples. Read more about free. If you are familiar with AWS and Azure and you want to compare to Google Cloud, there's a page that compares all three. It's like a big giant matrix. Like I use AWS Redshift. What's the equivalent in GCP land? And then if you want specific support for your favorite programming language, cloud.google.com/your-language. Oh yeah, free. Again, free trial. There's a free trial. Again, if I shouldn't say again because I don't think I ever said it. If you're a student, do not do it. Do the student credits, which are down here. Get your professors to give you credits for free because you don't have to give Google your credit card. Otherwise, this one, you have to give Google your credit card. Kind of makes you sweat a little, all right? Also, it expires. So if you don't know what you're doing, as soon as you enable this, the clock starts ticking. In 89 days and 23 hours and 59 minutes, it's gone. So you need to really plan what you're going to use it for, okay? Do not just go and do it and think you have time because that time will disappear on you. Keep in mind that there's an always free tier. So a certain number of GCP products are completely free up to certain usage limits, and it's free independent of free trial. It's just always free every month or every day, okay? You do need to give your credit card. There's no expiration to this, and it's completely, yeah. You have to basically use up this always free tier in order to incur billing. So a lot of times when you get the student grants and you get $50, you go, oh crap, Google, oh, so generous, you only gave me $50. We discovered, or the education team discovered that students only use about less than 25% of the $50 when they're doing classwork because they haven't used enough to trigger to go beyond the always free tier. So it's very hard to chew up money, unless of course you do a lot of map reduces or you're using, Cloud SQL, which doesn't have a free tier. Okay. And then Workspace is free up to certain usage limits, but Workspace is free because it's covered by your monthly subscription, in which case if you have a Gmail account, it's free, right? So your subscription fee is 0, so that's why most Workspace APIs are completely free, okay? All right, bring me to your organization. It's my job to help you. So as a consultant, I'm available from time to time. I'm okay now, but yeah, if you find this important, in order to train other coworkers at work. I can do a tech talk like this. I can do half full day seminars. I can do hands-on workshops, or I can do multi-day training courses, or I can help you with migration like Python 2 to 3, or App Engine migration to Cloud Functions, Cloud Run, maybe GKE one day. Anyway, my business cards are up at the front, so if you want to reach out to me, feel free to grab one. Otherwise, I can be found on the internets. That's my handle for Twitter, Stack Overflow, and GitHub. You can also email me directly. It's on my business card as well. Slides for tonight's talk are here. If you missed, again, the talk I gave 4 years ago, the 101 talk, there's a link to it here. And then if you all notice the progress bars down at the bottom, that is actually a Google Slides add-on written in AppScript, because Google Slides and PowerPoint don't come with progress bars. It's good to know where a speaker is, because like you want to yawn, you want to nap, or it's good for the speaker too, because we need to know how far we're at versus the clock. So I think, oh damn, I went over by 3 minutes. I didn't do a good job. My daughter says hello. She loves drawing these anime characters. And then here's the open Google Doc again. I want to thank Dan and Joel for inviting me and setting all this wonderful stuff up here. And thank all of you for coming to the talk tonight. So hopefully you all learned something and can make use of this. All right, I don't know how much time we have for Q&A, but is there any kind of Q? Or are you guys just satisfied and you're going home happy?
Let me check the stream, actually. I have to be inclusive.
Oh, yeah.
It's a new world out there.
I know. Any Q&A in the live stream?
We're no longer just recording in 24 hours later posting. If people want the content now.
Oh, my God. All right, wait. Before everybody goes, I have to take a picture.
Say expense.
Yeah. Expense report. Expense report. Can I get everybody? 1, 2, 3, make a face. Yay. All right, thank you, guys. Thank you all. Appreciate it. All right, wait. Y'all are so special. I'm going to take a front one, too. Smile, and then smile. Awesome. All right, thank you. Now I know I was here, because when I get Alzheimer's, I might not remember. My wife says I have it, so.
Mind if I try? Okay, use your adapter.
Yeah,
to
sure.
Do a shout out.
Sure.
Sorry. So, thank you, Wesley, for attending tonight. Again, we're going to have another meetup here next Wednesday. It's going to be more Kubernetes focused. You can build upon what you learned tonight and put it into Kubernetes, right? So that aside, I also want to announce that the beautiful building we're in, Aspen Group again hosting us tonight. Pretty cool place. I work there, so maybe I'm biased. But, doing multi-region Kubernetes, trying to figure out how to do software deployments in healthcare. Yeah, this isn't your mama's healthcare shop. Like, we're not going to be processing payments and taking forever. We're literally doing Docker containers in our field offices. We're doing multi-region deployments. We're failing over in the middle of the day. Yeah.
Did you guys complain about me wanting to do Docker containers?
Well, it's kind of cool stuff. So we'll figure it out. So at the end of the day, pretty cool place. I mean, doing .NET Core. So if you're interested, looking for a role, just check us out. It's gonna be pretty dope. So thank you everybody for coming out. I know it's kind of bad weather out there. Take some food, take some sodas, take some water. Otherwise, I don't know what I'm gonna do with all that food. I definitely can't eat it. So thank you everybody for coming out, and I'll see you hopefully next Wednesday.
Yeah. I'm going to hang around for a few more minutes if they won't kick me out, in case anybody has last minute questions. Oh, yeah. That's a good idea. Thank you. Sure. Thank you. Appreciate it. I don't know how to turn it off. I'll have to turn